Honorable dignitaries, invited guests, conference speakers, attendees, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the beautiful island St. Martin. I welcome you here to our island and thank you all for traveling here for the Caribbean Shark Conservation Symposium. I sincerely regret that I cannot be here in person to welcome you. I would like to thank our co-hosts, the St. Martin Nature Foundation, the Pew Charitable Trust, and the Bahamas National Trust for working with us to make this symposium a reality. We have an exciting program in store for you over the next 2 days. We will hear from global shark experts, including scientists, economists, and trade experts. You will have the opportunity to hear from keynote speaker Sir Richard Branson, fellow governments and NGOs about their respective efforts on shark conservation. They have traveled here from as far away as Canada and Hong Kong. Why do sharks need protection? Well, many people may not realize this, but many shark species are headed toward extinction. In fact, scientists tell us that 100 million are killed every year. But sharks are important to our oceans, and they are important to our islands like St. Martin. They balance our ecosystem, and they are an important part of our tourism economy because divers from all over the world come here for the opportunity to see sharks in the wild. Here on St. Martin, we formally recognize the value of our sharks, and as a result, they are fully protected. Thanks in large part for the work of the St. Martin Nature Foundation, in 2012, the government of St. Martin placed a 10-year moratorium on shark fishing, thereby designating our waters a shark sanctuary. Tomorrow, we will formally announce a long-term extension of our shark sanctuary. We want these magnificent creatures to be here for our children and our grandchildren and for all the future visitors to our island. We understand that many in attendance have also taken bold strides in ocean conservation or are currently working to do so. As the St. Martin Minister of Tourism, Economic Affairs, Transportation and Telecommunication, I truly hope that all stakeholders, businessmen and experts will find common grounds for the sake of this formidable species. Protecting and saving our shark population will have economic benefits for our island. Your efforts, followed by concrete proposals and agreements during this conference, will yield invaluable information that will be translated into concrete policy action for our government. We look forward to more discussions and the exchanging of ideas over the course of the symposium. We hope that this will be an informative and enjoyable 3 days. I wish you a successful conference, and I look forward to meeting you in person again in the near future. Also, please make use of this opportunity to explore our island and all that it has to offer. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the Pew Charitable Trusts. We work with governments throughout the Caribbean and all over the world, along with scientists and other NGOs, to help improve the status of shark conservation through science-based policies to best protect them from the growing threats they face. I'm not going to speak for long here because I want to hand over to the true experts to really go into detail on the science that underpins shark declines worldwide, the trade that affects them, and how we can best protect them. But I will do a few small housekeeping points for the meeting today and tomorrow. Sir Richard Branson will be joining us, as you know, around 10 a.m. At that time, I'll ask everyone if they can remain seated. He'll join us for a high-level segment to discuss his views on shark conservation, and we will all have the opportunity to put our views to him and have a discussion. At that point, afterwards, we'll have a press conference here, and then move outside where there'll be an opportunity for group photos with Sir Richard and networking. And as I said, I'm going to hand over to a true expert, world-renowned marine scientist, Dr. Boris Worm.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you to everybody who came here today. Thank you to the Prime Minister for introducing this meeting and for inviting us here. It's a true pleasure to be, and a special honor for me to talk about my and other people's research on sharks and give a very brief overview of the changing relationships of sharks to people here in the Caribbean and around the world, and what that would mean for conservation. So Jaws was mentioned, and this was for most people the entry point into the world of sharks. And for most people, it stopped there. Most people have not been with sharks in the water. My first encounter with a shark in the water was actually in the Caribbean, on the Mesoamerican reef in Belize in 2005. It was a bull shark. I was by myself, and I was free diving late in the day. And the encounter left me changed for a lifetime. And I repeated it several times after, because the bull shark would always show up at the same time at the same place. And it became a kind of a relationship for me that's carrying on to this day as I work as a scientist on these creatures. But then others are making similar experiences and also communicating these. So Rob Stewart, who is with us, made this movie 10 years ago, which has transformed the view of many people, of a global audience, of what sharks are and who really is the victim and who are the hunters. So the numbers have already been mentioned by His Excellency the Prime Minister. People kill at least 100 million sharks a year. That's an estimate we derived 3 years ago, and it still stands as a cautious estimate, as a conservative estimate of the total mortality of sharks in the world. It could easily be double that or even more. By comparison, sharks kill a maximum of 10 people a year. So the odds of being killed by a shark versus killing a shark are at least 10 million to 1. Sharks, in other ways, are much like us. They have a reproductive rate that's low, and they mature late in life. So this means, like us, they cannot sustain that additional mortality. In fact, through 400 million years of evolution, an evolutionary time span that is 200 times that of our own species group, they have survived because they had not to endure that additional mortality that we now inflict on them. Oops. Now, the image I showed previously is from a fishing market in Japan. This is a daily scene there. This is large sharks, pelagic sharks, blue sharks, mako sharks, some hammerheads in there as well. And it's mostly for the trade in shark fins, which is very lucrative. It's a delicacy on Asian markets. And this trade has become global only in the last 25 years. It was a local market before, and it's now a global market. And this is what's driving a lot of sharks to extinction. So very recently, scientists from around the world actually mapped out the risk there is to sharks who are threatened with extinction, and we see that this risk, relatively speaking, is highest in Southeast Asia, where most shark species live, and where we also have major shark fin producing countries like India and Indonesia, for example. Also Spain, a major exporter of shark fins, fishing in the Atlantic, also in the waters around here. The Caribbean is of intermediate risk, and it's not a major shark fin trading region. So that's good, because it means there's still something to be saved, and people here don't depend on this trade for their income. The Caribbean also, as a biologist, is a very special region to me with respect to sharks. Not only that you have a lot of shark species, you also have some extreme shark species. You have the smallest and the largest shark species in the world, which also happens to be the largest fish in the world alive today. And the dwarf lantern shark is actually only described from the Caribbean. So this is something that's very special to this region, along with the Caribbean lantern shark and other species that are endemic that occur nowhere else. This species was only found between Venezuela and Grenada, nowhere else in the world. This species is more globally distributed, but you have healthy populations here in the Caribbean that need to be protected. An important part about protecting sharks is to connect their various habitats. A lot of them are migratory. So a piecemeal approach to shark conservation often doesn't work that well. Countries need to work together, as we see at this symposium, in order to protect these migratory species. Despite the efforts that have already been taking place, we have recorded a loss of sharks in the Caribbean. How do we know this? We know this from surveys that people have done, but more importantly, eyes underwater. This is records from several hundreds of thousands of dives analyzed by a project I'm co-leading called E-Oceans, where we're looking for shark hotspots. And we're finding that the Bahamas is really the last place in the Caribbean, wider Caribbean region, where you can still find large populations of sharks. Also the Virgin Islands to some extent, maybe the Mesoamerican Reef, where I saw my first shark, but other places have seen a great loss of sharks. The sharks are still there, but they've become very scarce, and they're absent from some regions. So this is a call for action for this region in particular. In fact, when we look at the number of people in a particular place and the sightings of sharks by divers, we see that sharks occur almost always only in places that have no people, far away from people. Where people live, sharks dwindle. But this is not a necessity. We're finding that sharks are still sighted frequently in the Bahamas, in the Virgin Islands, and in some parts of Florida where protective measures exist. Although a lot of people live in these regions, they can coexist peacefully with the sharks. So all of this gives rise to a new relationship. We're redefining our relationship with sharks. This is a shark class I'm teaching in Canada. We have sharks there too, blue sharks and mako sharks mostly, and porbeagle sharks, cold water sharks. And we go out and we don't fish the sharks, we swim with them and we study their behavior. And the students are very engaged and very brave and very passionate about the conservation of these creatures. And more people are. More and more people see the intrinsic value of these species. People who have witnessed scenes like this will always become advocates for shark conservation because they feel the intrinsic value of these species, which are twice as old as dinosaurs and which are unique to this planet. But that value that people are increasingly placing on sharks, that they are seeing in sharks, is translating into economic value. The global shark watching and shark diving industry 3 years ago was worth $315 million. Now it's easily twice that, and it's probably reaching $1 billion before the end of the decade. And as you can see, a lot of these operators are presently in the Caribbean region, and they're expanding. In fact, where appropriate infrastructure exists, for example in the Bahamas, you see rapidly increasing dives and revenues from this industry. This is a growth industry. One of the fastest growing sectors in tourism is ecotourism, including shark dive ecotourism. Now, if you allow me to be playful for a minute, I tried to translate the economic value of sharks, alive or dead, this is an example, a documented example from the Bahamas, into something more tangible. So a Caribbean reef shark is estimated to be worth about $200,000 in value where dive operations exist when it's alive. And this is over its lifetime. This is not per year. This is over its lifetime. So this would buy you a Ferrari, California. If you kill the sharks and you sell the fins, it's about $50 to the fisherman, which would buy you a sneaker, so half a pair of sneakers. So just to make the point that this is not just wasteful from an ecological point of view, it's also economically nonsensical. But I'm an ecologist. I work on ecosystems. I'm interested in how the world works. The world we depend on, the oxygen we breathe, the water we drink, the food we consume. A lot of it comes from the ocean. What are sharks doing in these ecosystems? It can be summed up in 3 words. They're controlling, they're connecting, and they're stabilizing, much like the police in our society. So I want to give you 3 quick examples. How are they controlling? What we're seeing, this is a well-documented example from the US East Coast. We're losing all the big sharks. We're seeing an increase in smaller predators, and we see a loss of fishery resources, such as shellfish, that are valuable export commodities, much like shellfish are export commodities here. So we see that the ecosystem is changes in ways that are not amenable to people. Another point is that sharks connect ecosystems. They transport energy and nutrients from offshore to inshore ecosystems back and forth. This is tiger sharks in the Caribbean and the open Atlantic. You can see these long-range migrations and how they're connecting these ecosystems. This is essential. Ecosystems don't exist in a bubble, much like our cities don't exist in a bubble. Sharks essentially perform trade in nutrients and energy between these ecosystems, sometimes between continents. This is a spectacular example of a white shark swimming from South Africa to Australia and back in a matter of half a year. And maybe most importantly, we live in a time of rapid change. Ecosystems have become very vulnerable, including coral ecosystems that your tourism is partly dependent on, have become very vulnerable to environmental and climate change. And what we're finding is that as you're losing sharks, this is an example from the Mediterranean, the loss of sharks occurred after World War II up to 1975. You see that the resilience of the ecosystem in terms of its compositional stability decreases and the reactivity to environmental change increases. So in other words, the ecosystem becomes more jumpy, more unpredictable, and more dangerous. So in an interesting twist to our common perception that sharks are a danger, sharks actually making the ecosystem more safe. So what are the solutions? This image comes from Raja Ampat, which is an area in Indonesia that had abundant shark finning, illegal fishing, bomb fishing, blast fishing, toxic poison fishing. Everything that is bad went on there. And one reason for that is that people weren't quite, they didn't know that they sat on a treasure trove of biodiversity. This is, in fact, the most species-rich region for any species group in the marine realm in the world. So it started with education. It started with reaching out to kids and adults, of course, and giving them pride in what they owned and what was being destroyed under their eyes. And this region is now turning around. We see sharks coming back. We see corals coming back. We see recovery also of the human communities. How do you do it? What are the tools? So most commonly, we believe that fisheries management can save sharks, and that is true, but not entirely true. Fisheries management is a necessary condition, but it's not necessarily enough. There are problems, even in well-managed fisheries, of bycatch that's thrown overboard unused and dead, and this includes shark species and rays and skates, their close relatives, which are just as vulnerable. Also, what we've been finding as we reviewed the success of fisheries management for sharks in shark fisheries around the world, what we're finding is that about half of them are unsafe. So despite management taking place, they're still fished at a rate that doesn't allow for recovery or depletes them even further. And this happens even in very advanced fisheries management regimes, for example, in the US. So it's very hard to manage sharks in a way where you fish them and you still keep them around and you keep their role in the ecosystem intact. So what we need in addition to fisheries management, it needs to be on top of fisheries management, not in spite of it, is protected areas. And as you are well aware, there's a global trend in increasing protected areas. We're now at about 12 million square kilometers worldwide. About 3.5% of the global ocean is protected. But if you think about it, this means that 96.5% of the global ocean is not protected and free to fishing. This means there's very little refuge for sharks, which are world travelers. So that means we need more action specifically for sharks through protected areas. Then often people ask, are protected areas working? Are they big enough? Can they protect these wide-ranging species? And the answer is a resounding yes. So this is a global survey from dive surveys, again, from all around the world. And we see the effects of protected areas like the Great Barrier Reef Marine Protected Area, protected areas in French Polynesia, where sharks are well protected due to a common belief that the souls of your ancestors are coming back in the forms of sharks, very different from our culture. Cocos Island and the Galapagos. And then also in the Bahamas and the Virgin Islands, we still see some abundance of sharks, largely due to protective measures in those areas. So we can see this even on a global scale. Protection needs to be strong. So there's 5 different criteria that have been scientifically studied. Whether the area is no-take, whether it's actually enforced by sound policy, whether it has been there for more than 10 years, whether it's larger than 100 square kilometers, and whether it's isolated from human impacts. And what we're finding is that where 4 or 5 of these features are met, we're seeing a large abundance of sharks. So sharks really need strong protection. Not just any protected area will do. It needs to have at least 4 or 5 of these features. And that has been shown scientifically all around the world. And then there's another question of how do you measure the success of these protected areas? How do you make sure it's actually happening? And again, I want to point to divers in the water. We've collected almost 1.5 million dives, and there's thousands of them coming in every year, actually tens of thousands every year, that help us keep an eye on seeing what's going on in the OMBC. We have very healthy coverage here in the Caribbean, so we're able to see what is going on, and as we speak, we're evaluating the effects of shark sanctuaries and how divers see those sanctuaries changing as they are being protected. So this is quantitative data, but also we have these revealing comments that tell us about successes and problems that still need to be addressed in these regions, country by country, area by area. And so we really have a lot of eyes out there that can help us inform shark conservation policy. In closing, I would like to lean on an example from the land. So we also have large, highly mobile predatory species on land. For example, the jaguar. In Central America and South America used to be one complete connected population of jaguar. And now the habitat has been broken up into little patches of forest. And this is a bold, visionary project that tries to connect these patches again to one big population through these corridors that are protected. And this project is called Paseo del Jaguar, or Path of the Jaguar. And it's an idea of restoring that connectivity and that functionality that this animal brings to these forest ecosystems. We can do the same in the Caribbean. We can have the same vision for sharks. We can create a Paseo del Tiburón, or a shark path, where the migratory pathways of the whale shark and the hammerheads and its cousins are protected by linking up shark sanctuary or other protected areas across the island chain that makes up the Caribbean. So we have these migratory pathways protected, and the species remains safe even when it swims out of the protected areas of this country, for example. So let me wrap up this short presentation. It's just a brief overview of what's happening in shark conservation and shark science right now. It's a very vibrant field. A lot of scientists are working on this. And we're finding, the more we look into this, is we're finding more and more species that are threatened by fishing, but also by bycatch, which is unintentional, but which can be fixed by working with fishermen, as we do in Canada, for example, of avoiding bycatch, and also by habitat destruction, such as the removal of mangroves. We're finding through careful study all around the world that the loss of sharks compromises the functioning and also the stability, the reliability of marine ecosystems, particularly in an era of climate change. And I think this is a very important point. Sharks provide insurance, if you will, to these ecosystems, and that insurance is actually quite cheap to get. Large and well-protected areas can help to safeguard sharks. Again, we see this all around the world, and we see it in this region, such as in the Bahamas example. And our vision is that a chain of connected shark sanctuaries could help to restore healthy shark populations in this region and, in fact, around the world. And with that, I would like to thank you very much again for the invitation and for the honor to present in front of you. Thank you.
It's wonderful to be here today. I first became, I was first sort of enlightened to what the problems with what was happening to sharks when I saw a wonderful film called Shark Water, and it was wonderful to see Rob who made it. Where is Rob? Is he in? There we are. Rob who made that film here today. And I think thousands and thousands of people over the world, I think, became activists having seen that film. Shark Water showed how 1.5 million sharks a week are decimated around the world, and they're decimated for their fins, and then their fins are cut off and they're thrown back in alive to die. And in the case of beautiful rays, they're decimated because of a little gill in the ray. And at the rate it's going, there's something like every year 20%, I think, more killed than new sharks being born. So we don't have the sort of wholesale slaughter of sharks in most parts of the Caribbean. But what I felt was let's let the Caribbean be a shining example to the rest of the world of a place that becomes a shark-free zone where those of us who love to swim in the oceans can enjoy seeing the sharks. I mean, I remember in the Galapagos Island swimming with literally, I would say, 500 hammerhead sharks, and it's an awesome experience, and it's just so wonderful to see so many alive. In the Bahamas, where there's one of the wonderful places that have created a shark sanctuary, one of the biggest tourism attractions now is going and swimming with the sharks. And for those who might be frightened of swimming with sharks, I actually sat on the bottom of the sea and had 8 tiger sharks with mouths that big swimming around me. They're not interested in you or me. They occasionally they make a mistake, but they don't really like eating humans. So by and large, it's been it's been very successful, and more people get killed in the roads on most islands than are killed in sharks in decades. So I'm just hoping today, I believe there's going to be some announcements. We want to try to get the whole Caribbean to be a shark-free zone. And by sharks, we're not just talking about sharks, we're also talking about rays. Rays are part of the shark family. They are so beautiful, so vulnerable. And I'd love turtles to be added as well, but we'll do one thing at a time. So we had a wonderful meeting in the BVI, and the Bahamas, the Bahamas, the British Virgin Islands, Saba, and Bonaire all created shark sanctuaries. And I'm hoping today that by the end of the session, we would love to. I think St. Martin and Cayman Islands are very, very close, if not already there, and Grenada and Curacao. We'd love to try to get you on board by the end of the day. Anyway, thank you very much, and good luck. Thank you.